now I'm going to introduce our second speaker. Hi, Nicola. This is Dr. Nicola Hoggard Creegan. She's a theologian and she's also co-director of New Zealand Christians in Science. You will have noticed that she's the person who we organise the conversations with. She is author of Animal Suffering and the Problem of Evil, and she's just finishing a book on freedom. And today, Nicola is going to be talking to us on Panpsychism and the possibility of robotic intelligence. Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you, Sarah. In a 5-minute talk, one is going to be both too brief and skim over huge amounts of details, so many caveats. So one might as well be provocative. Panpsychism, I would argue, lends weight to the idea that we may never get strong AI in the sense of AI with inwardness. So panpsychism, what is it? Quoting from Adam Carman, panpsychism is the view that it is like something to be every particular thing in the universe. There exists a first-person perspective or experience for humans, bonobos, single-celled organisms, electrons, etc. Or as Joanna Leidenhag says, panpsychism is a family of theories within philosophy of mind which seek to explain the existence of consciousness in the human person by positing mentality as fundamental throughout the natural world. In other words, all physical entities have a subjective side which is not reducible to the physical, or consciousness goes all the way down. Panpsychism suffers from the combination problem. How does the mental combine with what we know of the physically real? But common to most forms of panpsychism is also the idea that consciousness or mental life or inwardness follows its own rules. So why do panpsychists argue consciousness is not reducible to the physical? There are a number of arguments. There's Chalmers' zombie argument. We can imagine beings just like us, but without inwardness. You can go and chat with something like that as a bot online at any time. Chalmers' inverted spectrum argument, Strawson's linguistic argument, and the knowledge argument, which says, for example, that you might know everything there is to know about pigments and color, but be unable to see and therefore not be able to have the experience of seeing. I think Terry Pratchett goes into that. So why panpsychism and what problem does it solve? It solves the problem of consciousness. At least it goes some way towards solving the problem of consciousness, which keeps being a hard problem in the sense that it's not solvable. B, so also really does evolution. The small imperceptible changes all adding up doesn't seem to explain all the stunning success of evolution, its deep interconnections and its sentience. Quite apart from, well, that evolution isn't just a collection of small changes, and complexity, for example, doesn't explain the difference between us and bonobos, for instance. And see, less and less philosophical willingness to accept that something can come from nothing. In other words, that consciousness, which is not reducible to the physical, can nevertheless come from the physical if you add enough complexity. Panpsychism is distinguished from emergence, which has various forms but claimed just that the whole, being more than the parts, explains everything in a hierarchical world, and process theology and philosophy, which can be seen as earlier forms of panpsychism, but the problems with process being that it colonizes God within its system and does not accept enduring identity over time. And to me, it's always seemed as though it wasn't quite psychic enough. Which brings me to the final point, artificial intelligence. Let's assume panpsychism might be true. What follows in terms of AI? What questions does it raise? In the 90s, an AI lab at MIT put a theologian on their staff so they would know when Kismet, their cute robot, had crossed a threshold and become humanly sentient, it would need to be baptized. This is true, but the program fizzled out. But why hang out then? So what are then some of the repercussions of panpsychism, assuming it might be true? The first is, why hang out for a human style and level of consciousness? Panpsychism and the ubiquity of animal intelligence makes us ask how we can test for other levels and types of consciousness, which raises the following questions. If consciousness is part of ultimate reality, everything has some inwardness, but not necessarily because it is organized in complicated ways. Hierarchies and dense interconnections matter, but perhaps not as much as ordinary emergence assumes. Panpsychism does emphasize that there are types and levels of consciousness, and a Turing test, or having the inwardness of a human, is not the only type or intensity to look for, and not the type we might expect to find first. Do we perhaps need a cockroach Turing test? Then, although hierarchies and emergence does not yield results just by itself, some modalities do seem to concentrate and channel consciousness. For example, DNA-based protoplasmic life, which is also maximally perceptive for its size and solves what is called the binding problem, may be necessary rather than simply complexity itself. And then, is AI mimicking what Ian McGilchrist would call left brain intelligence, which is the most efficient, most abstract, most decontextualized, least aware, most hubristic form of human intelligence? Panpsychism, therefore, I would say, has the capacity to change the way in which we look at artificial intelligence and how we test for and perceive inwardness. And these are some sources. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nicola. I don't know if you're like me. I was very relieved that you started with the definition of panpsychism. We've got one. Oh, yes, Neil Bergman. How would you do a test on an AI to tell if it was really conscious or sentient?
Oh, okay. Well, the traditional way has been to put it behind a screen with a person and to see whether you can tell the person from the machine. Unfortunately, these days you really can't tell the difference because ums and ahs and all sorts of things like that are built into the programming. I mean, it's very often you can't. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to do this, but you can go online and talk to some of these things and ask them if they're really real, and that really stumps them. They don't really know what to do. But there isn't any absolute test, of course. That's part of the problem. And there's been a lot of controversy about that recently.
Great. Hey, Dora, why don't you unmute yourself and ask Nicola your question? Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Nicola. Sorry, I didn't have room for more there. So my perspective, as you know, is early Christian patristic stuff. In Gregory of Nyssa, I found this idea of soul as pervading the created reality and advancing from, say, mineral to biological, from plant life to animal to human, but it becomes awake on the level of humanity, where it meets somehow, crosses paths with the fact of being created in God's image. Now, in this case, at least in Gregory of Nyssa's system, we have like a natural impetus towards the soul waking up. On the other hand, it happens on the human level due to the fact of being in God's image. I wonder if we can broaden this, say, perspective to apply to other levels of the created reality, and why not to our own creations?
Yeah, well, so I think we do have to broaden it to almost every level of life on Earth. But at the same time, thinking that there might be something different about humans, and that is a very, very difficult problem, because we're not just tool makers and we're not just culture makers, etc., etc. But and that we can see all sorts of signs of soul in animals like dogs and things like that. But yes, well, I mean, the problem with the machines is that they may be the wrong kind of thing to get soul. Or they may not be, but I'm just suggesting that perhaps if complexity is not the thing about our machines, our computers, our AI, is that they're intensely complex and many, many connections and things like that. And that's what people have been trying to model. But if that kind of complexity is not what's really needed, maybe it's protoplasmic life and long periods of evolution. If that's the case, if that's what channels consciousness, then we're looking in vain to AI for properly human intelligence. Obviously, we're getting very, very good left-brained intelligence, fantastic computing power and all those sorts of things. Yeah, so I'm just saying maybe. We don't really know, of course, but my suspicions are that you need some sort of protoplasmic life to channel this consciousness. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question from an anonymous person. Panpsychism seems to be an attempt to provide an alternative. Sorry, it's just moved. Oh, it's just disappeared.
Oh,
Is it? It's just disappeared from mine. Sorry, I don't have access to the chat.
oh, here it is. Seems to be an attempt to provide an alternative to naturalism, but without accepting some sort of supernatural account. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's disappeared.
Well,
sorry, Nicola, I'll just read it out for our audience.
yeah, okay.
Panpsychism seems to be an attempt to provide an alternative to naturalism, but without accepting some sort of supernatural account. Is that correct?
Possibly. I think panpsychism is very, very broad, and it's been enthusiastically perhaps appropriated by some theologians because it provides a basic sort of ontology which is very compatible with supernaturalism. But yes, I think that panpsychism is also compatible with all sorts of understanding of what the psyche is and where it is, in fact, relative to the physical. So it is a broader concept, but so are most philosophical ideas and metaphysics. Yeah.
Okay, Richard Lee says, I love the idea of a cockroach Turing test. Have any steps been made toward this to date?
Not as far as I know, but I'd like to see one. Yes. I mean, I always think it's very odd that people kept hanging out for this human type of intelligence to suddenly appear, when surely other kinds of intelligence would appear first, like, yeah.
And Andrew Shepherd says, what would be the ethical implications of holding to a panpsychist ontology, particularly with regard to our use of non-human species and matter itself?
Yes, well, the matter becomes rather difficult, doesn't it? Yes. Well, I think that if we look at Genesis, for example, whatever we hold to, whether it's panpsychic or not, we're meant to be treating the natural world with enormous reverence and care. And so panpsychism perhaps brings us back to an understanding of the natural world, which is probably common in most Indigenous cultures and probably in our past as well, which is that there is something really rather extraordinary about the natural world, and that it is alive and not dead. And I think it might help our motivation to treat the natural world better, rather than giving us a particular ethical framework in which to do so. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Look, we've just finished all our time. Thank you, Nicola. Can you join with me in thanking her?